Welcome back. Hope you all had an opportunity to enjoy some coffee and conversation out in the foyer. We are moving on to our next session. The next panel is going to explore the subject of meaningful public involvement in AI governance. Our next panel moderator is the public participation and research lead at the Ada Lovelace Institute. Please join me in welcoming to the stage our moderator, Dr. Anna Colom.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is the session Public Voice and AI, a one-hour panel discussion on how we can more meaningfully involve the public in decision-making on AI. My name is Anna Colom. I'm the Public Participation and Research Lead at the Ada Lovelace Institute, which is an independent research institute based in London, whose mission is to ensure that data and AI work for people and society. And for this reason, public participation is at the core of the Ada Lovelace Institute research and strategy. And we work closely with researchers from across disciplines, social sciences, technical, legal, through research, policy, and practice. So I'll be moderating this session, and this will work as follows. So I will briefly introduce the rationale behind this panel, why did we think it was important to talk about this topic. And then I'll introduce each of the speakers. You can see their names here, who I really want to thank for taking the time. Dr. Brenda Ogembo will join us by pre-recording. And unfortunately, James Robertson has had a bike accident this morning. He's okay, but he couldn't be here with us today. So a shame, but he's kindly recorded some voice notes, which we will try and play from our mics. So, but thank you so much, everyone, and thank you also to Professor Jack Stilgoe for co-hosting this session, professor at UCL and policy and engagement lead at Responsible AI. So each speaker will give a 5-minute provocation or contribution based on their evidence or experiences on, how can we do public engagement better. And then we'll have another round for each of you to respond to anything that any other has said. And then we will have time for questions from any of you. So let's get started. So the first question is, why this panel? So the Ada Lovelace Institute has just published a rapid evidence review called What Do the Public Think About AI? And this panel is really a follow-up from some of the findings in this report. You can read it online. But one of the key findings was, the need to more meaningfully involve people on key decisions on AI design, deployment, and regulation. So that's why we wanted to have this discussion. And I will briefly read some of the top-line insights from this report and invite you to read or skim through later on, because there is, of course, a lot more nuance. But for now, I'd like to highlight the following points. First finding in the report is that public attitudes research seems so far to be consistent in showing what the public think about some aspects of AI. And we think this evidence is an opportunity for policymakers, and the consistency in the evidence shows that it's research that needs to be listened to now. The second insight is that there isn't one AI. The public have nuanced views, and they differentiate between benefits, concerns, risks, harms of existing and potential uses, depending on the context, who's affected, etc. So this nuance is really important, especially when there's a tendency in the discourses, and we've been saying this in this fringe in other days as well, to talk about AI as one thing. The third finding is that people generally welcome AI uses when they can make tasks efficient, accessible, and supportive of public benefit, but they also have specific concerns about uses and effects, especially when these uses replace professional judgment and human communication for decisions with high stakes in people's lives. For example, access to welfare, finances, jobs. And there's also concerns in the evidence that relate to privacy and fundamental rights, as well as societal inequalities. Fourth finding, on regulation and the way forward, people have some views on how to make AI work for people. Among quite a few other findings within that theme, One of them is that the evidence is consistent in the public asking for regulation that is independent and that it has teeth. Fifth finding, people want to have a meaningful say over decisions that affect their everyday lives. They want their views and experiences to be included in decision-making processes. And they expect to see a diversity of views as well that are heard and that are part also of monitoring and oversight and legislative processes. Sixth finding, there's 7, so I'm almost there. There are important gaps in research with underrepresented groups, those impacted by specific AI uses, and also research from different countries. The evidence suggests that different groups and people, like young people or people from minoritized communities, may have different views or lived experiences as well of some uses, but we don't think there's enough research yet, and therefore there needs to be a lot more. Also, some people and groups and parts of the world are underrepresented, at least in the evidence we've been able to gather. And AI is a global issue. Different publics are impacted in different ways across its supply chain. So it's important really to understand, to have a global perspective. Of course, our position as a UK-based research institute also means that we might have missed evidence that's in other languages or from other countries, but we think that there is a need for more proportionality on evidence from non-Western and non-English speaking countries. And the last finding that I'd like to highlight here is this need for more public involvement. In the report, we draw on literature on public participation, and we argue that there's a significant body of evidence that demonstrates that there's ways to do that meaningfully. For example, we talk about experiences from deliberative democracy, which we will talk about in this panel today. But we also find that making these processes work requires commitment from decision makers and those who commission these processes so that they are embedded and consequential as well in terms of what comes out of them. And we also argue in the report that complex or contested topics like AI need particular and careful research. In other words, it's not enough to do polls or surveys and think that that's enough to know what the public think. We really need to think deeply about what research methods and engagement methods we use. So these are the findings we wanted to highlight. We also clarify some terms in the report. And one of them worth mentioning here is that when we talk about the public, we do it with implicit acknowledgement that there are many publics, many different communities and societies, so we are referring to the plural of the word public. And another thing I'd like to clarify from the start, since we talk in the title about citizens' assemblies, is that we are using the broadest possible definition of the word citizen, meaning anyone who's a member of a social, economic, political community, even when their citizenship has not been legally recognized. And of course, this is a very important distinction because it means that for some of us, there's some people might have less access to some civil, social, and political rights. But just for the purpose of the discussions and how deliberative democracy refers to citizen assemblies, we are including the broadest possible. So this panel is a result of this last finding, really, on the need for more public involvement. We found through conversations with policymakers that it was important to discuss a bit more the how-to question, how do we involve the public? And we think there's a huge body of evidence and experience, so we should have answers that we'd like to start here. So I think that's it for now. I'll start introducing the speakers. And we'll start with Rich Wilson, who is the CEO of the Iswe Foundation. And in 2004, he founded the Public Participation Center Involve. And since then, he's been at the forefront of the new democracy movement, most recently co-founding the world's first citizens' assembly, the Global Assembly on Climate and the Ecological Crisis, also founder of Good Help and the Founders Initiative for Civil Society. So, Rich, thank you very much. You're welcome to come here or to whatever you prefer, or to talk from your seat. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Anna, and great to be here today, everyone. And thanks for that re-clarification of the Citizens' Assembly piece. I think it's a generic term that, for the first time in my career, we're able to talk about, we're able to use a thing. Who here actually knows what Citizens' Assemblies are? Can I get a sense of that in the room? Okay, so who doesn't know what they are? A bit more, excellent. Okay, so it feels to me like this whole AI summit, Fringe, is fundamentally about how do we tame the dragon of AI. I think this organic metaphor is a little bit more helpful in terms of thinking about what we're going to try and do. It may be a nice dragon, maybe a nasty dragon, but how do we tame that? So just to get a sense of who's in the room here, I'd like everyone to imagine it's the 1st of November, 2040, 17 years from now. Really do this. Like really imagine. So I'll be like 55 then. They're declaring mine, not 55, I'll be older than that. Sorry, much rather 65 then. Goodness, maybe. And I want everyone to really think. Do you honestly think, like, given the politics, given the power, given what you know about technology, do you think that AI is we're going to be able to sit there and think, back in 2023, we got it right, we got the regulation right. Actually, AI is really been a force for good. And then I'm also going to ask the question, it's actually no, I think it's probably been a force for bad. So who thinks it's been a force for good? The panel as well? A force for good? Okay. Who thinks it's been a force? Who thinks it will have been a force for bad? Can we vote twice? you can do whatever you want to do. You can vote 4 times. So there's a definite majority here of skepticism kind of in the room. So just until you can have a kind of conversation about that. So when this conversation, I don't know if this conversation started with when Sam Altman, right, doing his, making his statement in March of this year, saying we need a global dialogue involving everyone on Earth and how we draw the boundaries around the AI system. Or I don't know if it started after World War II, when a proposal for the UN was that it would be made up of citizens and citizens' representatives and not nation states. That was one of the proposals made at that time. Maybe if that argument had won through, the situation over the last 60, 70 years would have been very, very different. You could be arguing, as Dennis Habibi says and many others, that we need an IP PC for AI. What I would say, what I would argue, is that taming a dragon requires all of the tools that we've got in our arsenal. We definitely need both. And indeed, around the IPCC question, we've already got an ISPC, the International Panel on Social Progress. We should definitely repurpose that for AI. That's an obvious thing that we should do. But we also need to have new forms of politics and citizens' involvement to be able to govern that technology more effectively. And when we did the world's first Global Citizens Assembly in 2021 for COP26, we had the chair of the ex-chair of the IPCC, Bob Watson, was in charge of our knowledge and wisdom element. And then we ran the world's first Global Citizens Assembly involving large numbers of people around the world. So people who aren't aware of what a Citizens Assembly is, so they are a representative sample of the population. So it could be this bit of King's Cross, or it could be of the world. They're selected by lot, usually, so by lottery. Doing that globally is complicated and difficult and can be expensive. But you can look at our website, globalassembly.org, to see how we did it on that occasion. But the reason that people have got really interested in this idea recently is because they almost always come up with proposals and policies that are more commensurate with the challenge than politicians do. There's a global wave around the world of people coming up with new deliberative processes, frankly, to answer the question, how can we have a government that's fit for the polycrisis or the situation we're in? They also are really good at developing solidarity and overcoming polarization. And if you design them right, which not everyone does and doesn't always happen, they can also be real engines for activation and agency. So fundamentally, what this endeavour is about, it's around trying to think, how do we fix democracy? And given that we know that I think in the UK, 58% of the population want to see significant political change, in countries like Greece and Italy, it's way over 80%. This is a burning question, and part of the reason, I believe, why we have that lack of support for our political institutions is very much because of technology. Of so many technologies that have entered our lives that we've had no choice around whatsoever. So this is not just a critical question for actually, for how we live our lives in 2040, but it's actually about democracy and government, the whole business. It's really critical for all of that. So we are launching a permanent global citizens assembly at the Summit for the Future, hopefully with the backing of the UN in September 2024. So I'd love to talk about how we do that today. And one of the we've identified kind of 4 things which we think are absolutely critical to make it work. Firstly, is get real about the politics. We've just written a blog called Getting Real About Citizens' Assemblies. Essentially, it says it needs to be a political endeavour. This means looking at where the power lies. Is it in military establishments? Is it in deep mind? Where does it actually land? Because too many of these processes have veered away from this and have suggested we need to sort of inform decision making. We need this to be framed as a political endeavour. That's kind of critical. And working with movements, etc., to do that. And if we look over history, when these forms of public deliberation have been most successful, say around nuclear perhaps, which is in the AI dilemma talk, which Tristan talked about there, is they have achieved profound political change. They worked with social movements to do that, but it just took too long. We don't have 30, 40 years to play with. We need to do the same kind of job in a much more contracted space of time. The second point, go big. Look at the Convention Citoyenne in France, over 70% awareness amongst the French adult population. It was a huge endeavour, that citizens' assembly there. We need to do something similar. There's no point keep going small, in my opinion. We need to go big. We need to locate it within the public dialogues. I know that there are people at Connected by Data and others who are looking at mechanisms and practical ways of actually doing that, which I think is exactly the way to go. And we also need to focus upon the big questions and not necessarily just the small questions. So people might have seen the OpenAI call recently on these 10 experiments and deliberation around AI. I don't know if people are aware of those at all. I think it's an excellent piece of work. I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcomes from them. But they were on really the specifics of ChatGPT, etc. We need to look at politics. We need to look at power. We need to look at things like when we designed social media, was it really a good idea to have the whole economics of that technology based upon our attention? Was that really what we wanted to do in creating our technology? Unless we're looking at the big questions, the economic models, I think there's a way in which we're diverting civic energy away from and potentially even providing legitimacy to a technological pathway which we don't necessarily want to be on. And then finally, which I would say, we absolutely have to create permanent infrastructure. In order for these processes to have impact, they need to be creating mechanisms which can ensure the citizens' actions are transferred into real, on-the-ground change in the big companies, in government regulation. And without permanent government infrastructure, that just doesn't ever happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to so many thoughts already. Thank you so much for that very interesting contribution. So we will now listen to Dr. Brenda Ogembo, who's joining us via pre-recording, as it was in the end not possible for her to join, even if she's based in Oxford. We tried, both the organizers and herself, but it's great she's been able to do the pre-recording. So thank you, Brenda, if you're watching online. She's a board member of DemocracyNext, and she is also a principal clerk assistant and the deputy head of the Senate Liaison Office for the Parliament of Kenya. And part of her role is to think about how to institutionalize these citizens' assemblies or deliberative processes. So we'll listen to Brenda now.
The first question that they had asked me to address was, in what ways can we meaningfully involve the public in decision-making processes on complex policy issues? And I think a key consideration that is often overlooked whenever people ask this question is the issue of adequate information. Can citizens engage with complex information and processes on complex policy issues? And the answer is yes, and the research shows us that they can do this. The difference is whether they have access to adequate information. Bureaucrats or various decision makers, legislators, if you will, are only able to engage with complex decision-making processes because they have adequate information and support and infrastructure that enables them to explore these questions, explore scenarios, and then arrive at decisions. And the research shows us that when this information and these processes are made available to citizens, then they too are actually able to adequately process complex issues and make decisions that benefit the common good outside of their own personal self-interest. And I think this is something that, oftentimes when we talk about deliberation is not sufficiently addressed. That a key cornerstone of effective deliberative processes is ensuring that citizens have adequate information that they need to be able to engage with complex policy-making processes. The second question was, how can we reimagine deliberative democracy so it works for different publics and different contexts? And I would say that in terms of different publics, deliberative processes have actually succeeded. The process of random selection, which is a key cornerstone of many deliberative processes, ensures that we have different publics engaged in deliberative processes, because this is a very intention. The place where I think that we have not succeeded very well as deliberative democrats is in the question of context, and research and practice has not evolved as robustly. And I think we must work hard as deliberative democrats to begin to appreciate the differences in context and how we can design deliberative processes that respond to different contexts, because a lot of the research and practice that we currently have is centered on the experiences of the global north, and we find very little case study or very little research experience on deliberative processes in the global south. And I think we need to begin to allow for new experiences and new examples and iterations of deliberation, and focus more on meaning and intent. Oftentimes when I talk about deliberation in Kenya, people say that what we practice in terms of public participation is not deliberation. But I think my research shows that it is deliberation, and what we need to look at is meaning. What meanings do citizens, or what meanings do bureaucrats, or what meanings do decision makers attach to these participation processes? And we see that in Kenya, for example, it's very much based on, this thick discussion, this kind of co-decision making, and that they're very much looking at deliberation, wanting to be involved in discussion, not just expanding space for discussion, but actually expanding the depth of the discussion and decision making processes. And so it is very much deliberation. So how do we strengthen, this form of deliberation that exists in the global south that doesn't look necessarily like the traditional processes of deliberation in the global north? How do we appreciate the local context and local practices that are very much anchored, if you ask me, in traditions of deliberation? How can we incorporate them into formal decision-making processes and strengthen them, as well as ensuring that we deliver processes that are less resource intensive? Because deliberative democracy, deliberation processes are very resource intensive exercises. And in the global south, where there's a lot of resource competition, we need to ask ourselves, how can we design deliberative processes that are more resource sensitive? Because the current design of deliberation is very resource intensive. The third question that I want to address is, what can we learn from Kenya's deliberative tradition and the inclusion of public participation in formal government-led processes? And the Kenyan Constitution, for those of you who may have already engaged with it, you know that public participation, or public deliberation as I like to refer to it, is a key cornerstone of this Constitution, and citizens have a right to engage significantly on decisions that are being made, for example, before the legislature or by the executive. They actually have a right. It's mandatory that they present any policy or legislative decisions to the public to engage before decisions are taken. And we have had instances where citizens have actually gone to court to contest decisions that were taken because of insufficient public deliberation, and they have been successful. Conversely, we also have situations where citizens have gone to court to contest, and with the same parameters of previous cases, have actually failed in the courts about insufficient public participation. And so I think what we see in the Kenyan situation is that it's possible to scale public participation. It's possible and doable. It may not look as neat and as organized as it does in traditional public deliberation, citizens' assemblies, for example, or the way sortition works, but it is possible to scale and ensure institutionalization of these processes. But at the same time, we see the very real tension of public participation done badly, or deliberation done badly, and what the impact of that is, where we have seen citizens disengage, become very apathetic, both in public participation processes, but also in other civic processes such as elections, because they feel that they're manipulated by decision makers, feel manipulated by politicians, feel that they're used to rubber stamp decision making, and so it reverberates beyond just the policy space, but also into spaces like elections. And so I think we need these two situations to sit in tension, where I do think that scaling up of deliberative processes is important, but how we do it is also critical, because we could have very adverse effects that we're not able to reverse. And so I think this is something that needs further exploration. And the question is, do we really need to engage and institutionalize and ensure that there's deliberation in every decision-making process, or do we need to identify these key spaces where deliberation is critical, or where citizens need to engage? How do we design this to make it more effective? And I think, that's a question that's coming out of the Kenya case, and I think it's one that's interesting to follow, to see as judicial precedence begins to emerge, as we begin to talk about changing our constitution, as we begin to sit better in the constitution that we made and begin to make changes to it. What can we learn from that, from public participation? I think it's an interesting case to continue to follow and to see how that is going to play out. And the final question, because I am running out of time, is the question of artificial intelligence, and if this topic has any particular implications for participation, or whether it is the same as other complex issues like climate change. And I will add to that space exploration, which I'm very interested in. And I think institutions such as DemocracyNext, in which I sit on the board, as well as the Rockefeller Institute, are actually beginning to explore this very discussion about global issues that have global impact. But those who make decisions around them are a select minority, a select few, because they have the resources and capacity to be able to do so and influence the direction in decision making. And so I definitely think that there is space for global deliberation on some of these things, where those who don't necessarily have the resources to be able to, for example, go to space, but will be impacted by the long-term decision to explore space, need to have a seat at the table when decisions are being made about how this is being done. We see the impact of this on climate change, where, certain groups of countries have industrialized and benefited from, pollution, if you will, but the cost and the impact of addressing the issues surrounding climate change involves collective responsibility of all countries, even if they were not involved in the decisions, the policy decisions within countries that have led to some of the situations that we're now facing around climate change. And so I think artificial intelligence is definitely one of those issues where the impact is definitely being felt, particularly in the Global South, which is involved. We have young people involved a lot in designing the kind of technology that is coming out of AI now, and it's having impacts on them as a society. And, those countries are being left to deal with the impact of some of this artificial intelligence, but we're not involved in its usage or in its design or in the policies that surround its usage. And so I definitely think that there is space to explore this, and how deliberation can be used better in decision making, including even at international level for international institutions such as the United Nations. And this is all space that DemocracyNext is beginning to look into, and they're a good partner to reach out to or institution to reach out to if you want to explore this discussion further. It's a broad and complex discussion, but definitely I do think that there's space for deliberation to better structure some of these decisions and ensure that global problems have global input in terms of how we choose to go forward with some of this emerging technology, rather than leave some people behind in that they will have to bear the consequences. So I think I will stop there because I am at time. But thank you again for the invitation to speak. And if anybody would like to reach out to me to discuss any of the issues that I've mentioned here further, the Institute has my contacts and I'll be very glad to speak with you. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you, Brenda. Great, very interesting and valuable perspective as well. And now we will try something, we don't know if it's going to work, definitely not scripted, which is the voice note that James from the Sortition Foundation has sent us. I think he sent the voice note from A&E, so we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, so James is the director at Sortition Foundation, which is an organization that provides democratic lottery and certification services to many organizations that design and implement citizens' assemblies. And they have this interesting proposal on replacing the House of Lords for the House of Citizens. So we'll see what.
Hopefully this works.
Politics is about weighing up the pros and cons of different options, and so really the question comes down to who do you trust to do right by you? Who do you trust to make decisions on your behalf that weighs up these decisions, which are really hard to make and have to be informed by values and priorities? They're not, in other words, they're not just technical questions. And so The problem is that basically trust in politics and trust in politicians to do this, to make decisions that do right by us, is also really low right now. So, for example, often trust in politics comes only second to the NHS and the economy in the biggest issues facing the country in the Ipsos's issue tracker. So, what's also happening at the same time, however, is that while trust in politicians is going down, trust in each other goes up. So if you look at the World Value Survey, trust in each other and our neighbours is actually going up right now. Politics is about weighing up. So basically that's why we believe we need a House of Citizens, because we need a voice we can trust in Parliament. And we can outline how that works. But I think the broader stuff then is to say that public polling shows that this is a really popular option, that we already trust juries of people to make decisions in the criminal system, so this is tested. And that people will say, oh, it's a pipe dream. But ultimately, the Lords, they've been trying to make an electric chamber for 100 years, and it never gets out the Commons. People get it wrong, that the Lords block it. It never gets blocked by the Commons because the Commons are worried about it undermining the primacy of the Commons. So actually, if we need a voice we can trust, which we do, and we can't use AI or politicians, then we're looking at the answer, and that's us. And AI is no different to any other issue, whether that's climate or the economy, that we need, if we're going to rebuild trust in politics, you know, we need something like the House of Citizens, basically. So that's my message to the world, to the group. And yeah, so unlike the House of Lords, basically a House of Citizens would be made up of around 300 people that reflects the broad makeup of the country in terms of people's backgrounds and where they come, like where they call home. So you'd have a broad spread of people. For example, you'd be guaranteed that half the decision makers would be women, there would be young people. Unlike in the Lords, where most have a background in politics, you'd have people from a range of professions. So you'd have scientists, tradespeople, shopkeepers, teachers, nurses, doctors. And they would basically work by the same as the Citizens' Assembly works. So for each law, they would listen to expert guidance on the issue, and they would then discuss it, and through those discussions come to a point of view, and then submit amendments to the House of Commons in the same way as the House of Lords does. And people would serve on that for between 18 and 24 months, and then a bit like they've been on parental leave, they'd return to their jobs, and they'd be paid the same as an MP for undertaking the work. Sorry, I hope that's coherent. The painkillers are just starting to kick in. Thanks, folks.
Thanks to James for doing that after having maybe broken some leg. We don't know yet, but yeah, thank you. Just on the idea that he was talking about this being a tested idea, there are many other cases. Paris has established a permanent assembly as part of the city council. Milan has piloted and started now on others. So there are examples that we could draw on as well from different parts of the world. But let's now go to Tania Duarte, who is the founder of We and AI, and also coordinator of Better Images, and I think you'll provide a very interesting, also different perspective into involving the public. So thank you so much.
So yeah, thank you very much. I'm finding it a bit hard to follow someone from A&E who still managed to put together something that is probably going to be more coherent than I will, but I'll do my best. So I'd like to propose that public engagements and deliberations, the kind of wonderful ideas on assemblies, and I'm really inspired by what I've heard here, are only part of the picture in terms of increasing the participation necessary to have a hope of defining governance which works for everyone. And that we need to make sure that the focus on engaging with what will always be a limited amount of people doesn't mean that we forget another huge challenge which needs to be addressed, that of engaging publics and grassroots civil society groups to proactively identify and effectively voice issues, opportunities and concerns in areas in which they have lived experience every day, not just on engagement or jury day, and not just when someone asks them and when someone asks them the question that they think they should be asked. With such untested technologies released into the public domain so rapidly, it can be argued that the learning curve in terms of understanding some basic principles about AI technologies and the societal impact is phenomenally steep. So steep that many politicians, lawyers and business executives have been shown to really not fully understand how machine learning, generative AI work. It's no surprise then that many people with less requirement to keep up with the developments also don't have accurate or useful mental models of the many forms of AI in their lives, certainly not useful enough to make informed decisions about their approach and their relationships with AI. And while establishing that building this solid foundation is often the role of experienced engagement professionals, deliberation professionals, guess what? They too are also dealing with the same information processing challenges themselves. Furthermore, as well as dealing with the rapid pace of change, people are generally not starting at ground zero when it comes to understanding the capabilities of AI. We've grown up surrounded by sci-fi culture and narratives which not only provide the most dominant and visceral reference points for our attitudes towards technology, they're actively drawn on and referenced by media and technology companies when communicating about AI through linguistic devices, visual imagery, and often direct references. Collins Dictionary announced today that 2023's word of the year is AI, and that its use has increased 4 times in frequency this year. Yet in our conversations with people outside of tech and policy circles, I get a sense that some people's understanding of what the term AI refers to may have decreased rather than increased due to the noise and the hype. It's not surprising, given the disproportionately high profile and funding of existential risk organisations and advocates, of the plausibly human responses of generative AI, and the techno-utopians who state that advancing technology is one of the most virtuous things they can do, and believe they're on a journey to become technological supermen. I note the term men particularly in that. Experts say, I think a lot of you know who I'm referring to, experts say things like AI chatbots hallucinate or get confused, or AI explainers often claim that training a machine is just like training a toddler, or they describe AI as performing tasks previously requiring human intelligence. But they don't consider what publics, or indeed cognitive scientists, may understand human intelligence to mean. And without considering that the kind of warped mental models these anthropomorphic verbs create, and how literally they're taken, they're kind of not actually demystifying AI at all. Ditto the explainers and courses which are accompanied by images which represent AI as a human brain made of networks or circuit boards, and this is literally what some people think AI is. These factors can create significant barriers when discussing AI with publics, which need to be overcome in order to be sure that the opinion stated is based on facts rather than fiction, critical thinking rather than hype or pretty hype. It takes time and expertise to unpick misconceptions derived from sci-fi, dystopian, utopian narratives and understand their impact. Yet without this time and focus, many attitudes, barometers, particularly those not based on specific use cases, only tell you what public temperature is rather than give meaningful insight and idea exchange. And even when done well, as things stand, such mechanisms are only empowering limited groups of people to deliberate or judge, when with a greater commitment to support the definition and adoption of key principles about AI or general level AI literacy for our wider population, we could get wider participation from more diverse groups of people more readily. In other countries, commitments to enabling populations to navigate their way around AI in their lives have been made, yet in the UK, despite a general agreement that people need to know more about AI to protect themselves from scams, disinformation, exploitation, etc., we don't teach a lot of these things, and certainly kind of AI ethics and impact on climate, etc., in schools, even in computer science. And we rely on media and tech organisations to frame how AI should be thought of, who may also have vested interests. So while I'm in no way proposing that people's panels, juries, assemblies, all these other wonderful ideas and other proactive ways to include publics in deliberative processes are not good and an essential thing, I question how effective they can be when they so often have to find new ways to make proxies or estimations about people's levels of familiarity with AI and kind of build materials to explain topics on the agenda from scratch each time. To get true public voice, we need everyone to be given the opportunity to have a voice that is genuinely their voice and use it in ways that truly align with their values, interests and communities. And it's not as challenging as it sounds in reality because there's such great work to build on in the fields of digital literacy and much to learn from climate and media literacy, for example. This is, in course, in addition, not instead of guided and formal processes and structures, which would be more effective if they were supported by commitments to communicate more responsibly about AI and provide more useful information to wider populations. This is not to put the responsibility on publics to upskill themselves. Quite often they have expertise that, is really needed and it's not about skills anyway, but to combat the seeping of misinformation from the overinflation and misrepresentation of AI capabilities into the public discourse, which will always disproportionately impact those at the margins and those most impacted by systemic inequality. Publics and the civil society which represent them should be at the centre of determining what governance is needed, not at the fringe, but they need a greater commitment to help them do that.
Thank you so much. Great. So, Professor Jack Stilgoe, if you would like to help us make sense of all of this, maybe some pointers towards...
Thanks, Anna. Thank you for having me. I think I was making some sense before we started, and I had some neat notes, and now they're no longer neat. So let me just try and pull some sense from them. So ultimately, what we're talking about is democracy. It's something that has been my academic concern for about 20 years, working on a range of different emerging technologies, some of which, rich, and we've followed each other through some of these things, through the hype about nanotechnology, synthetic biology. Now we're arriving in the world of AI. There's all sorts of incentives for people to presume that all of the issues are new ones, and that new technologies demand new rules. I think that for all of the emphasis on machine learning, there's a huge amount of social learning that is relevant to governing AI, and I think we should use the sorts of innovations that our experts here know about to certainly innovate with the how of governance of this emerging technology. My concern, though, is that there's a tendency for people interested in public engagement to leap to the question of how. How do we do it? And what sort of barriers do we need to overcome in terms of literacy, in terms of representation, in terms of fairness, and all the rest of it? What I see of the AI debate suggests that there's a big problem also with the why. That making the case for a more democratic discussion about artificial intelligence is not going to be a straightforward thing to do. It's notable, for example, that when the word democratization is used by a lot of people in Silicon Valley, they mean something very different from what those of us that have been working in politics mean. They typically use the word democratization to mean make something cheap, right? So a technology gets democratized when we all have access to it, which is a very thin idea of the decision-making that actually needs to happen. Ultimately, as Rich says, we are in the domain of politics here. Politics is about winners and losers and who makes decisions and how those decisions get made. But there are all sorts of pressures towards technocracy. And we see that. We've seen it recently with Eric Schmidt and others claiming that ultimately decisions about artificial intelligence are too complicated for ordinary people to get involved with. They're too complicated for governments to get involved with. Therefore, it's best left to the grown-ups to make the decisions. It's a big barrier. I see other barriers. I think some of these are typical when emerging technologies come along. the people involved in creating those emerging technologies typically want to maintain control of those technologies. That's understandable, but if technologies are going to be as transformative as they say, and as Tania rightly points out, the hype is extraordinary here, but if they are going to be transformative, then we can conclude that AI is too important to be left to the people developing AI. There are some particular features of AI that I think we need to pay attention to that do mean that the participatory challenge might be bigger. I think there's a form of sort of strategic misanthropy that happens around the technology, where in a lot of cases, technologies are imagined, designed with a view of human beings as a problem to be solved. So a lot of my work has been on self-driving cars, and the way that technology companies talk about those technologies is that they start off by saying that humans get drunk and distracted and kill people, and therefore technology will be able to solve that problem. The public are seen as a problem to be solved in another way, in that they are seen as either mistrusting or recalcitrant or ignorant. And again, that immediately puts up a barrier to their involvement in the vital debates that we're talking about today. So we have to run experiments that reveal the potential for public participation in this area, but also we need to work with the people developing and governing the technology for them to be confident in opening up their decision-making to this new form of dialogue. There are some other difficult issues when it comes to AI. So AI is, we know, a black box technology. All technologies are sort of black boxes, but the trouble with explainability and accessibility and auditability of AI does pose a problem. The Prime Minister last week talked about the need for to have regulators in the picture, so that we don't just have a situation where technology companies are marking their own homework, but we are still so far away from externally valid, legitimate measures of AI's benefits and risks. If you compare it to other technologies like medicines or chemicals, where we have exactly that form of assessment well institutionalized. So next steps, what would I point to? First thing I think is a really interesting innovation, and I hope we got some representatives maybe from them in the audience today. So this week, a people's panel on AI, organized by Connected by Data, will be running their own sort of experiment in democracy around the discussions that we're having. And I'm fascinated to see what they produce and what they conclude, and how that fits or doesn't fit with what comes out from the great and the good at Bletchley Park. The second opportunity, I think, is with the institutionalization of what is currently the task force, but will become, according to the Prime Minister, the AI Safety Institute. The institutionalizing of these things is an opportunity to design in participation from the ground up. There are lots of precedents. There are precedents from the way that medicines are regulated. Lots of models to draw on to make sure that the voices involved in doing those assessments are broad ones. And then the final one is something that we will be involved with in the Responsible AI program. So you heard from the Responsible AI program, some of you on Monday. We will be running a working group on public dialogue to learn from some of these things, to take them forward, to spin them up, to make recommendations about how, in the UK at least, we can do things differently, but also sharing the sort of ambition that Rich presented about going big. Right? If we seriously think that this is, if AI is as big a set of issues as the people developing it claim it to be, and if the UK is seriously interested in building international networks on this, then we should be ambitious. There's a lot of money and a lot of momentum behind developing the technologies. We need to consider how the democratic voice can be as loud and as powerful as those voices. And I'll end there, if I may.
Thank you so much. I first wanted to have another round so you can respond to each other, but I'm worried about the time, and I'm thinking, should we just open up the conversation so everyone can? And maybe let's start by giving the floor to the people's panel that you just mentioned, and I think they are towards the end rows, but in the meantime, whilst we find a mic for them, I'll just explain. So the people's panel is being organized by the organization Connected by Data, implemented by Hopkins Van Mielid's 12 people that have been invited to take part through random lottery by the Sortition Foundation, actually, who James was representing. And they are here to conduct a review of the whole fringe. And on Friday they are deliberating every evening, if I understand correctly, and then on Friday they will provide a verdict of how much the conversations they've heard here reflect what they think should be a priority for the public. So does anyone would like to? Yes, please.
This is the question. This is a question that got written before the panel for panel politics reasons. But the conversation we're having, it starts at the wrong end of the telescope, and it immediately focuses on the technology and the controls and how to avoid sorter apprenticeship mishaps. And is it better really to start thinking about describing the sort of society we want? And it'll be a society where we've got the AI balance right. And it sits very well, I think, with what James just said. So the question is, if you wanted to do that, what strikes the panel as the sort of challenges we would face?
Should we take a few? I'm just conscious of time. I think it's a great question. Yeah.
Great. So there's someone here in the middle, in front of the blue shirt. Yeah.
Thanks. It's nice to be the first woman to speak in the panels this morning, in the questions. Thanks for that. So my question really is to pick up on Brenda's point, and I wondered how the panel are thinking about this international perspective. So you've talked about kind of nation states approaches to this. How do we think more about this internationalist approach and not going down this route of sovereignty? How do you consider that? So beyond the UK, one of the problems with ChatGTP, if you look at it, is who are the people that are harmed by the work that they have to do in order to make that tool safe for people mostly in the global north. So I'm really interested in how we kind of flip this idea of thinking about citizens, who that excludes actually, and going beyond sovereignty.
Great. Let's maybe respond to these two, and then we can go back to the audience. Anyone would like to start?
Shall I just do on the first one? I think yes. There's this sort of paradox with participatory processes that, in a sense, we're here because of a set of claims that are being made in the world about which are in effect starting with technology and imagining exactly the sort of problematic implications that you're talking about in these really peculiar magical terms. I mean, you mentioned the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but yet you know exactly these sorts of these odd things for you know that might find citizens might treat as alienating. And one of the things that we're trying to do in these sort of participatory modes is flip that around. To say, how do you start with people's concerns and meet the technology halfway? I mean, to my mind, it's one reason why dialogue is so important, that involves a lot of back and forth. It's not just asking a different question, it's actually a form of sort of political renegotiation that's going on. But yes, it's exactly the right task to turn that on its head.
I'm afraid I didn't fully understand the first question. Was it like what strikes the balance between risk and dialogue? Or I would just love to have clarification of that, if that's possible.
If we're pursuing this, what are the challenges we're going to face?
In pursuing the dialogue or the AI?
I'll just add for the panel, if that's all right. It's about starting the conversation from what society feels is the positive outcome. So working back from the positive outcome that society requires, rather than starting with the challenges of the tech.
So thank you so much. So, I mean, I couldn't agree more. So in my opinion, this is one of the real problems. So we've had these open AI calls for deliberation, which happened over the summer. There were questions determined by the technologists. This is precisely the wrong way to do it, if I'm honest, precisely the wrong way to do it. But the right way to do it is exactly how you're describing. So we say something like, what kind of world do we want to live in 10 years' time? A little bit like the thing I did at the start. And then once we set out that vision for what's possible, based upon evidence, based upon expectations and our own life experience, and then we come back, okay, well, these are the kinds of directions the technologies might take. And I think I was working in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley at the day of the Facebook IPO. And people that's when Facebook became made into a publicly limited company. And people I was there because we really believed those social media technologies could help democracy. Like I believed, I was drinking the Kool-Aid like everyone else, right? And I think if we'd have realized then that the way in which the economics of it was structured to basically turn us all into drones looking at our phones the whole time, because that's the attention economy, that's how it's all working, I don't think any of us would have had that optimism. And so I think, thinking, what kind of, do we want to live in a society that's communitarian, that's got low fossil fuels, whatever it might be for you, I don't really care in a way, but I think getting really clear about that, and then getting really clear, like Jack says, about the politics, the economics, the structures and the systems, that I think is exactly the right way to start.
Should we answer the second question, which was on the internationalist approach, maybe in terms of the Global Assembly and the experience?
Yeah, sure, absolutely happy to talk about that. So yeah, I think what's super interesting at the moment is that most people around the world self-identify more as global citizens than they do actually as nation-state citizens, and particularly in countries like India and China and most parts of Africa and Latin and Southern America, you've got like 82% or 80+% of people saying they self-identify more as global, different in global north countries, particularly the UK, Germany, North America. But what's really interesting about that for us is when we were having the dialogue and deliberations, getting people to participate from those countries was super easy. I mean, the demand was incredibly high. What I think is one of the most powerful experiences, so when we were doing the Global Citizens Assembly, we were having to bring people on board who didn't even know that climate change was happening. And yet they were the people who were the most vulnerable. Like their lives were, they were going to have, it was going to have could potentially have an enormous effect. To support people to really meet the severity of the crisis required incredibly skilled, emotionally intelligent facilitation to not go into denialism, either denialism which is like we can't do anything, or denialism, it's not happening because it's such a strong thing. So I think one of the things that we found, one of the things that we need to get a lot better at is supporting people to meet the reality of the situations, but building hope and efficacy and mutual understanding as we build a way up. Because often, I think, once we get out of our balkanized, filter bubbles of whatever our lives might be, into that global perception, it's actually really, really challenging.
We have only 3 minutes, so maybe 2 questions. The back row, or the row before the last one, and then the man with the blue top, and that's it.
Hi, I'm Zoe Crowther from Politics Home. So we carried out some polling today that showed 55% of the British public think that large tech companies have too much influence over the development of AI policy. And obviously going into this summit, that's been a huge question surrounding it, the influence of these large tech firms. So I was wondering, question to the panel, what you make of the fact that the Prime Minister is going to be having an in-conversation event with Elon Musk from X, and exactly what message you think that puts across to the British public and also to the wider world around the power of these firms. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And then another mic here. And we have 2 minutes, so if you can be brief.
Hi. Yeah, we don't often hear much about the why question of public engagement. If they do move straight to the how. And I was just wondering, because there is a problem of representation in that discussion on the why question. They often come from quite elite universities and come up with a resounding institution that, yes, democracy in all cases is a good fix. And regardless of whether or not we believe that, I just wonder if the panel had any decisions on what the right forum for gauging whether or not public engagement democracy is the right solution for this problem would be. Would you have like a meta-national assembly where you have citizens come in to decide if they should have any say in this? Or might that be a bit intimidating? But there needs to be some sort of upstream source of legitimacy for this sort of public engagement. And basically, ultimately, what would it take for you in the panel to not adopt, say, a democratic National Assembly approach and give in to the Eric Schmidt's position that maybe this is a really technical and expertise requiring problem?
Yes, please go ahead.
I mean, so in my opinion, well, it's not my opinion, we are living through the biggest backsliding in democracy we've ever seen. This is the reality right now. And these questions are pretty linked, right? And so in my opinion, we face a choice. And if you haven't read the Yuval Noah Harari piece in the FT, in 2020, he talks about we face a choice at this moment in history towards more or less empowerment or more or less global solidarity. And I think this is exactly right. We face that choice. So in either, with the various crises we face, be it AI, be it climate, we're going to either have draconian responses or we're going to have democratic responses. Things can't stay the same. I'm really hoping we can have more democratic responses. But if you're happy with more draconian responses, if you trust Elon, and Rishi to make decisions for you, then by all means. But I really don't.
We're out of time. Anyone else in the panel would like to reply to any of the questions?
I'd just echo a lot of that, and in answer to I'm actually going to borrow someone else's quote from the AI and Society Forum, which Promising Trouble ran yesterday, which was a really, very inclusive civil society event, kind of centering that. And someone there said they might as well be having the summit in a prison because they're just already discussing the crimes that they're going to commit, which is a quite extreme way of saying it. But I think if we look at some of the things that are going on at Twitter, X, and thinking this is what we're aspiring to, it's deeply depressing. So yeah.
Sorry to not have more time, but thank you so much to all the speakers and to all of you for coming. I hope that was at least the start of an ongoing conversation. And thanks everyone.